Afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tammy Wilson from the Sacramento County Office of Education, and I am the project lead on the California Dyslexia Initiative. We are really excited to have so many friends and colleagues from across the state and across the nation joining us today for this learning opportunity. We would like to welcome you to the 23-24 CDI Expert Webinar Series. And in this series this year, we're focusing in on the International Dyslexia Association's updated graphic on structured literacy instruction and what educators need to know about the content and the principles of a high-quality structured literacy approach grounded in the science of reading. For this third webinar, we are especially excited to feature the dynamic educator, Dr. Anita Archer. There is so much wonderful content to be explored in this webinar. We know you're going to learn a lot. We have a Padlet that will host the slides, as well as an expert webinar companion document that has discussion prompts and some future opportunities that you can explore around the webinar content. All of our webinar recordings are posted on our website about a week after the session, and sometimes even sooner. Next slide. The Sacramento County Office of Education is the project lead on the CDI, or the California Dyslexia Initiative, and our goal is really to provide professional learning within the system of support across California to build knowledge, skill, and capacity around teaching and supporting our students who are at risk for reading struggles and those who have dyslexia. We're delighted to partner with our friends at Glean Education, and my good friend and founder and CEO of Glean Education, Jessica Hammond, who is leading and coordinating these webinar series. So Jessica, I'll hand off to you. Next slide.
Thank you, Tammy. We are thrilled to partner with SCOE and the California Dyslexia Initiative to coordinate this webinar series for the third year in a row. For those of you who may not know of us, we are Glean Education, and we partner with schools, districts, and states to deliver online training, school leader consulting, and web-based coaching. Our work aims to build educator knowledge of evidence-based literacy practices to improve student literacy outcomes. Next slide, please. This webinar is the third in a series of webinars this year on structured literacy. If you haven't registered for them yet, please do. We'll be popping them in the chat and the registration links in the chat so that you can be sure not to miss them. Next slide, please. For this webinar, I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Anita Archer. Anita Archer is an educational consultant to school districts on explicit instruction, the design and delivery of instruction, behavior management, and literacy instruction. She has taught elementary and middle school students and is the recipient of 10 awards honoring her excellence in teaching and contributions to the field of education. Dr. Archer has served on the faculties of San Diego State University, the University of Washington, and the University of Oregon. She is nationally known for her professional development activities, having presented in every state over the course of her 40-year career. Dr. Archer is co-author with Dr. Mary Gleason of numerous curriculum materials addressing reading, writing, and study skills. Please help us welcome Dr. Anita Archer.
So thank you very much. What an honor for me to be in California today with the Sacramento County Office of Education. And the topic is the how of structured literacy. My real specialty is on the research on instruction. And so I'm going to give you my favorite highlights of what makes a difference as we teach all areas of literacy. There is where I live. And if you look at the cursor, my house is right up the hill from this. And that is exactly what you'd see out my window today, looking out at Mount Hood. And now I may be a little bit different than some webinar people because I constantly see the importance of active participation in every class we teach, whether you're a kindergarten or an intermediate teacher or a secondary teacher. Good instruction is always interactive. I say something, you say something, I write something, you write something. And so we're going to have you participate. Now, probably, since it is this time would be right after school, you might be in your own classroom by yourself, so you can talk out loud. Or you could be in a library at your school, and you're still going to talk out loud, because the more you participate, the more you'll get the feeling of the how of literacy instruction. So one thing you need is paper and pencil, because I would like you just to write down anything you're reminded of that you would want to take with you in this presentation. And at the end, you'll put them in the chat so that we can just get an idea of what was useful to you. And now, if I was teaching in your classrooms, and this week I had the great gift of being in 3 different elementary schools, giving feedback to teachers who were teaching intervention groups. And one of the things that we're working on is increasing the opportunities to respond. And when the answers are short and the answers are the same, we can have everybody say it. So now you're going to stay muted, but you are welcome to say the answers when I ask you to, just as a way to remind you of how useful it is to have unison responses where everyone says it. And sometimes I'll ask you to read with me, and you're going to stay muted, but we'll read it together. And you're going to write on your paper any good practices. And if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A or in the chat box. And we'll see if we have time at the end. I'm hoping, but then I always have too much. So this is just to remind us of how important it is to be interactive. Now, as you already know, the slides are going to be available to you also, so you have total permission to utilize them in your own schools, in your own work. Okay, don't forget those takeaways. So we're looking at the how of structured literacy. And here are my goals. My first goal, having taught in San Diego for many years and doing many projects, consulting projects in your beautiful state. I know that many of these ideas you already know. And you're just going to say to yourself, ooh, I know that. I'm really good at that. I always do that. So my hope is that this will affirm your practice. But some of us, as we go through our career, this is my 56th year of teaching, that some things drop out of my repertoire that I just need to be reminded. Why? Oh, why didn't I structure those partners better? Oh, why did I? And so I hope to remind you of some things that need to be resurrected in your own teaching itinerary, and maybe polish some things up a little bit. Just take what you're doing and take it to a little higher place, and maybe even expand your repertoire. So those are our purposes for this webinar. And always it is helpful for us to keep our minds on the outcome that is universal for all of us, whether you're an administrator, a teacher, a coach, someone who does training of coaches. No matter who we are, always we must keep our eyes on the true outcome, and that is learning. And so students come to us, just as you would go to a physician and ask, what can I do to get well? And they would give you advice, and they would give you information, and they would give you medicines. We have to guarantee that learning is the outcome in our settings. Learning and more learning and more learning and more learning. Sometimes we get off from that, and we're thinking about, oh, my outcome is finishing up this lesson. My outcome is keeping up with the pacing guide. But learning is the only thing that should be our pursuit. So, and I'm just here to remind you of this, and that is what we know is the strong relationship between how well you teach and the learning that occurs. How well you teach leads to learning. For example, I could tell students the goal of the lesson, and that would improve learning. I could have very structured, dynamic lessons, maybe even with I do it, we do it, you do it in the lesson, and that would increase the learning. I could listen, get many responses from them, and have them say things, write things, and do things throughout the lesson, and that would increase the learning. And I could monitor their responses and follow up with feedback. So that is basically the theme of this webinar, is that how well I teach equals how well they learn. Now, just earlier this month, in September, I was listening to a podcast by Reed Lyon. Now, Reed Lyon was basically one of the major leaders in reading first, but he really wanted us to remember the urgency we have. And so I'm going to read, and you're going to read with me. When you're working on something that's so critical to a life, to a child's life, belief systems don't cut it. Evidence cuts it. And this is the urgency that's in my soul that keeps me teaching many years. Someone just asked early this morning, are you going to retire? And I gave my usual response, retire. Let's look at the morphemes in that word, retired, to become tired again. I think not, but it's mostly because I want all of the children of California, all the children of my home state of Oregon, to be readers, because it affects their life in dramatic fashions. So we need to put in place the graphic put out by IDA to summarize what is structured literacy. Now, I know that you might have attended and still have available, I think, the previous webinars in this series and talked about the what. But this one, you really have been going to staff development, maybe online trainings. And so you've got this one down. What should we be teaching across the grades? Teaching phonemic awareness, teaching the relationship between phonemes and graphemes in order to decode words, being able to identify important morphemes within a word, prefixes, suffixes, and bases, understanding how words are divided into a syllable. And the big idea is every syllable has one vowel sound. And then all the orthographic conventions of punctuation, capitalization, word order. And on the comprehension side, that they have to be able to read the words, but they also have to have vocabulary and background knowledge, very predictive of their comprehension, and understand the structure of a sentence and of text, narrative, informative text, and of course, utilize critical thinking. So check that last session to go into this more deeply. We are going to pop over here to the how. What are the essential principles of instruction that guide how content is taught for both reading and written expression? And my feeling is that we had better see this with children first, and then we can use that as a base. So we are going to watch, and I knew that we would have teachers who work with kindergarten all the way through 5th grade, elementary school and middle school. And so I picked something in the middle. But we're going to watch a little video and your job, and this is 7th grade, and forgive me that I have some, I have actually numerous videos that I did when I was working in California, but this one was done in New York City. And I am teaching vocabulary, which would be an essential area of literacy instruction all through the grades. Yes, in read alouds, in kindergarten, in 1st and 2nd grade, vocabulary in our reading books, our science, our social studies, our math, all through the grades, we're going to be teaching vocabulary. So I chose it because of the generalizability of the content. So your job is to record any high leverage practices that you observed. So we're looking at not what is being taught, but in other words, how it's being taught. So we get an idea. And, you know, I was reminded, sometimes people will say to me, you know, explicit instruction, direct instruction is so boring. Well, I think you're not going to find that these kids thought this was boring, because we bring our energy to it. We bring the pace of the lesson. We get them actively involved. It is not boring. It is not a lecture. It is an interaction where I want the students to gain some content. So I'm introducing it very directly, but they're highly involved. So get ready with your pen to write down what you see that was a high leverage practice. And we just have to pull this up. Okay.
So looking up here, so we're going to expand on some of our vocabulary words. And the first word is what, everyone? Discard. And part of speech, it is a verb. And read the definition. If you discard something, you get rid of it because you no longer want it or need it. Okay, so when I get rid of something and I throw it away, another word for that is what, everyone? Discard. In fact, the synonym is what, everyone? Throw away. So if I clean up this room, as you two did this morning, you cleaned it up, and they found some paper and some pencils that needed to be thrown away. They did what, everyone? They discarded them. Okay, and so looking here, and read it with me, everyone, and starting here. What are some things that you should discard? Okay, and so everybody be thinking for a moment of your bedroom and some things that you need to discard. And begin by saying what, everyone? I should discard. My turn first. So I have a basement that is just filled with old books that no one wants. It's filled with overhead transparencies that teachers don't use. I need to, what, everyone? Discard them. I have cards. Every card that's been sent to me, I'm 64, every card that's been sent to me since I was like 5 years old, I have kept. And I have boxes and boxes of them, and I probably should discard them. Okay, and so first ones, then twos. Tell your partner something that you should discard and start with, I should discard. First ones, then twos, and go.
Old shoes.
Mm-hmm.
I should discard old papers.
Absolutely.
Discard my clothes I don't use and get it in charity.
Excellent. Okay, looking up here, and big voice your sentence.
I should discard my clothes I don't use to charity.
Excellent. So you're not just throw away, you're going to discard them, get rid of them, but they're going to go to charity. Excellent. Okay, well, looking here, and again, it's the word what, everyone? Discard. And read it with me. Brainstorm with your partner what might be discarded in a landfill. And continue. Count the number of ideals that you list. Okay, my turn first. So things that could be discarded in a landfill. Food that is rotten, old papers, a toaster that's broken might be discarded in a landfill. Old letters, old cards, clothes that are all ripped up. Okay, looking with your partner and count as you go, say as many as you can, things that might be discarded in a landfill, and go with your partner.
Broken things.
Broken things?
Things that don't work.
Things that don't work?
Things that work.
Things that work? You're going to discard them?
Things you don't wear.
Things that you don't wear anymore.
Painting.
Paint, yeah.
Clothes.
Mm-hmm.
Food. Tissue.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So we're going to do whip around or pass, meaning I'm going to start here and you're going to say one thing that might be discarded in a landfill. And so what might be discarded in a landfill? Your plastic.
Oh my gosh, you stole me.
I'll be back. And old toys,
Computers.
old computers,
Paper.
books. What? Clothing, TVs, rotten food, yes. Okay, I'll think about it. I'll be back. What?
Trash.
Trash. Excellent. And back to you.
Glass.
Glass. Excellent. Those are all things that might be discarded. Okay, our next word is indistinct. What word, everyone? Indistinct. It is an adjective. And read the definition. If something is indistinct, it is not clearly recognized or understandable. So if it is indistinct, it's a little bit difficult to recognize or to understand. And the synonym is what, everyone? Unclear. So if I look out the window and I can't see that building over there, I could say it is what, everyone? Indistinct. Okay? If I am reading something and it's just not clear, I can't understand it, I might say, well, this passage is indistinct. If we took a photo of you today and it was all blurry, but we could sort of pick you out, we could say it is indistinct. Excellent. And so here are some examples of things that people have talked about that are a little indistinct. And read it and go. Supposedly, this is a picture of the Loch Ness Monster. Okay, and why would we say the photo is indistinct? And you're going to begin by saying, this photo is indistinct because, okay? And so twos, tell your partner, starting with this photo is indistinct because. Twos, tell your partner a sentence and go.
I don't see it's really blurry.
Mm-hmm.
The colors like clear.
So I will send this whole video so that it can be posted since we can't watch all of it. But it did give us a chance to be reminded of the how, because we could teach vocabulary in many ways, but this is sort of an example of what that IDA graphic would tell us. So let's look at some of those critical elements. And first of all, here we have the graphic again, one that you used. Let's go back here, right there. So if we looked at this, we would look to see if the instruction was what? Explicit. If over time it was sequential. If there was cumulative practice of these vocabulary words after the fact with spaced practice and cumulative practice, and that different modalities of saying things, writing things, and doing things were included. And that the teacher would have formative assessment so he or she could make decisions about how to proceed within this line of instruction. And there would be feedback, and it would be highly interactive, and there would be scaffolding. So let me just take a moment and share with you the feedback that I would give this teacher. Now, I have, over the last 56 years, given her lots of feedback, and she still has things to polish up. And this one, I even announced how old I was. This was when I was 64. Now I'm 76, almost 77. But you know, good instruction is good instruction. Good instruction 12 years ago matches good instruction that I saw this week in the schools I visited. So I often think of the P's. The teacher was, yes, prepared, and was passionate about the content, passionate about teaching, and totally present. And yes, there was a perky pace. It moved along, not frenetically like you'd have in New York, but it did move along, the pace. And there was clarity. One of the critical elements that I think could have been added to the IDA graphic was clarity, because clarity of directions, clarity of expectations, clarity of explanations, clarity of modeling, clarity of demonstrations makes a huge difference in the attainment by children. And teacher-student relationships make a difference, as you well know. So I connected with the students. I smiled at them. I had close proximity to them as I monitored. I gave them eye contact. And most importantly, I set them up for success. So I taught them the information before they had to share it with their partners. I modeled the kind of responses they could make. And this was a 100% group of students that were English language learners. That was another reason I chose this one for California. And there were, in the management research, we look at having more positive interactions than redirectives or negative interactions, at least 4-to-1. Well, this was far greater than that. And routines is one of the most critical parts of the very explicit instruction. We saw 2 words being taught and the exact same routines, that the pronunciation was introduced, and then the meaning of the word, and then giving the students examples of it, and then having them respond so we could check their understanding. I want to point out how important those sentence stems were, because with the sentence stems, they ended up having answers that were complete sentences and answers that included the critical word, in this case, discard or indistinct. And this is the one I really wanted to point out, and that is opportunities to respond. And so I actually sat here and tallied the responses as we went. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45 responses I requested from them. And that's a lot of responses in less than 10 minutes. So we know how important the frequent responses are. Here they said things together, and I cued them verbally in some cases, and then some cases with hand gestures. They had partners that were already assigned, and so that I could say 1 say the answer, then 2 say the answer. And I did call on individuals. But what I want you to note there is that I did not have children raise their hand and volunteer. And I consistently find that this needs to be one of the first things on the how we teach in structured literacy would be to get rid of the sea of raised hands. Because we know children who raise their hands are more likely to be higher performing students, more proficient in English, and more assertive. It's what I call teaching the best and leaving the rest. In fact, in our schools that I work with, we have a no hands raised policy in all classes. Now, we do call on individuals randomly, and children can raise their hand to ask the teacher a question, not just to respond to a question. So equity, this is an equity move, no hands raised policy. And we also had different answers to a question. So we did whip around or pass. We did choral reading, which they did very well. Why would I call on one child when all of the children could practice their reading? And later in the video, if you watch it, we also did hand signals to review the words, and they showed it with their hands. And I monitored their responses. And in some cases, that meant that I had to walk around I had to look around and talk around. My favorite monitoring routine: walk around, look around, talk around. And I also was equitable because I took data on it in terms of the number of students that I listened to their own responses. All right. And I gave them feedback. I gave feedback to the whole group, and I gave feedback to individuals that was private and quiet. So that's the big picture of what the essential principles of instruction would tell us to do. And I picked four of these to put a little bit extra time into, so that you could really think about your own teaching and which of these you might want to polish up a bit. So these are the four essential principles I chose. One, is instruction sequential? Is there a scope and sequence that is logical, that underlies what we are teaching, particularly in things like letter sound associations or the introduction of meaningful morphemes or different aspects of writing? And is the instruction explicit? That was very explicit. I did not ask students if they understood, if they knew a word. I told them. And we'll see that that's very important to explicit instruction. And next one was, it should be highly interactive. We'd have to say 45 responses was fairly interactive. And that feedback would be given. So I know that I am talking to very competent educators. So this is truly a review. But it does give us a chance to reflect on our own how when we teach any aspect of literacy. And I'll suggest to you that these qualities of instruction are equally useful in math and science and social studies and art class and music class. So, sequential. What it really means is that there is a planned sequence of instruction. Now, this means that we have a scope and sequence. And hopefully that when you get curriculum materials, you're going to be looking at that scope and sequence. And certainly there should be a scope and sequence for foundation skills, but also a scope and sequence for the embedded spelling and for the writing. But it goes beyond that. The scope and sequence then needs to have lessons that are also in a logical sequence. And there also should be a plan for practice to maintain the skills. But it's planned. It's not just off the cuff. It's not just hope that it'll make a difference. It is very intentional. And if there's one thing about good instruction, it's intentional. And that scope and sequence should go from simple to complex. It should also go from very high frequency to low frequency skills or knowledge. So letter sounds that we use all the time in words, leading up to things that are low frequency. Why, just today, when I did my Wordle, I had to go to figure out, well, what are the low frequency Wordle letters? Because obviously I needed one of them in this word. And so high frequency to low frequency. And that if there's a pre-skill or a prerequisite skill, it's taught before. So before we have kids sound out words, we've taught them to automaticity the letter sound associations. So there's all kinds of examples in literacy of very sequential instruction. This is an outline from David Kilpatrick on phonological awareness. This is a sequence that is research validated by Doug Carnine, Jerry Silbert, and Ed Kamanui, where they went from simple to complex. So starting with single vowel letters before they added blends and digraphs and final E and vowel teams. But also a sequence that goes from high frequency to low frequency. For example, a and are much more common within words than X, Q, and Z, teaching things that you can use immediately before things that would be not as high frequency. So in Louisa's work, Louisa Moats, she outlines types of words that we would introduce. And again, it would be from simple to complex, from high frequency to lower frequency. So this is a part of the how, is to have a sequence, to follow the sequence, to have lessons that follow the sequence, but then to have practice over time so that the students have an adequate amount of practice so that it is moved from working memory to permanent memory. Well, sometimes when I was teaching at universities, I would have mottos that I shared. And my teachers or my students who then became teachers always called them archerisms. And this is the archerism for sequential. Our whole goal is to break it down, set it up logically, because we want students to experience success. Because the more success I experience, it breeds more success. And equally importantly, there is a direct relationship between students' motivation, willingness to give it energy, willingness to give it time, willingness to give it practice, that comes from the confidence of having success. So always in teaching, our goal is learning, 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 and that means teaching so well that students are successful. Well, what other four would I pick? And, you know, I've written books on explicit instruction. So I would pick out explicit, because when we look at the graphic from IDA, it has it's sequential and it is explicit. And in the book that I wrote with Charles Hughes from Penn State, we labeled this, first of all, it is unambiguous. You know, I'll never forget one day I was teaching high school algebra, and I was teaching the order of operations. I modeled it in equations, and then I had many practices I did with the students, and then they did it. And we also rehearsed the order. And afterwards, the teacher said, "Oh my gosh, they got it." And I just want to remind us that I got it is like the purpose of like teaching. And so we want it to be unambiguous so that students get it. And it's thus very, very direct. And again, you know, some people say, well, that's going to be so boring. But did it appear that those children were bored? And yet it was, I introduced the definitions very directly. I introduced the tasks very directly. And so they were comfortable. They knew what to do. Even some of the students that I coached as I was monitoring, who had less facility in English at that moment, was able to give very good individual responses. Well, so explicit instruction is first, teacher-led. Now, does that leave out children? I'm always confused by the term child-centered instruction. Well, of course, all instruction is child-centered. There they are. That's who we're teaching. It's just that it is teacher-led. And this is a big one. One of my mottos is, you tell them the intervention or the information, you don't ask. You tell them the information, you don't ask. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, here's what I see happening so often when I watch videos, which I watch a lot of videos every week of teachers teaching, is that many times the teacher will start out by saying, does anybody know the meaning of discard? And a perfect example is from a second grade where a teacher started and asked, does anybody know what precipitation means? Now, here's the possibilities. Hands go up and I call on a child, and this happened in this class. Precipitation, that is like what's under your arm when you're really hot. Confusing two words. What does precipitation mean? Next child. Well, precipitation, you sip it. All right. The third child had a very accurate answer, said precipitation is when water comes down to the earth, and it might be in the form of rain, it could be in form of snow, or it could be in the form of sleet. Now, both of those problems, and the teacher then immediately said yes and moved on. So here we could get incorrect answers, which then, particularly young students with no background knowledge, may add to their repertoire the misinformation. But then one child had a good answer, so the teacher assumed that they all had it. Well, so it's safer to tell them. And then people say, but how about bringing out their prior knowledge? Well, we're going to do that in the examples that I gave, that I asked them, the tasks that I asked them to do. They had to utilize their own background knowledge. So it is very useful to tell them because, again, of equity across all of your students. Well, and it should have clarity, clear explanations, clear models. And many times we will do demonstration and then we practice it with them through guided practice. And then we have them do it on their own where we check for understanding. Now, this terminology over in the red, in 1974, I wrote a chapter in a book. And it was at the time of Madeline Hunter in California. You were so blessed to have her in your districts and across the country. And she talked about demonstration, very clear demonstration, very direct demonstration, and then guiding the students and supporting them, scaffolding them, and then checking their understanding. And I wanted terminology that was memorable. So I used I do it, we do it, you do it, because we can use it now. This terminology of I do, we do, you do is actually basically everywhere. It is ubiquitous. But it does summarize. I say the sound, we say the sound, you say the sound. I write the sentence, we write the sentence, we write the sentence, we write the sentence. I help you on a little bit of it. We write the sentence and you write the sentence. So this is a model that we can use throughout teaching these literacy skills. So what would I want you to remember? What do I have to constantly remember? And first of all, it is the big idea. And read it with me. How well I teach equals how well they learn. There is a direct relationship that's been proven again and again and again. So when students aren't getting it, what we have to do is look at our instruction and alter our instruction to ensure that they can get it. Add more scaffolding, spend more time on it, make it more explicit, get more active participation. So when learning is not occurring, the thing that we can control is our teaching, so we look at that. And I do it, we do it, you do it, and it's often not all in the same day. It could be spread over time. Some people just refer to it as I do, we do, you do. And then this one is so big. But embedded in literacy instruction will be what? Routines and more routines and more routines and more routines and more routines. Now, as I said, this week I have been spending my time in 3 Oregon schools, elementary schools, looking at intervention. And what I saw was the benefit of routines. Because when the teacher says, like for the vocabulary, that I'm going to tell them what the word is to ensure the pronunciation, I'm going to then give them meaning, then I'm going to give them examples, then we're going to practice it together by answering questions to check their understanding. And that could be used every time vocabulary was taught in the English class, in the science class, in the social studies class. The benefit is the teacher knows the routine. Thus, the teacher can have more confidence in what he or she is doing, but also can take their limited working memory and put it on the children's responses, not trying to figure out what do I do next, because they know what they're going to do next because they have a routine. And children benefit from routines. They know, okay, Archer, when she comes and teaches our class, she's going to tell us the meaning. She is going to be sure we can pronounce it. She's going to give examples, and then she's going to ask questions to check our understanding and then record it in our log, which we didn't get to see. So routines, routines, routines. So we're teaching something very systematic and sequential, and we are teaching it explicitly. We are not hoping they'll discover it. No, because there's always two sides of the coin on discovery. You discover it or you don't. And in terms of literacy, we have to ensure they will get it. Well, then we have active involvement. And this is the one that I could spend all night with you on, but it is the most transformative part of explicit instruction. And read it with me. Actively involve all students in responding throughout the lesson, making learning visible. Everyone says it, everyone does it, everybody writes it. Now, I'm going to have to give you the very short course on this because we could spend a few hours, if not a day, on this topic. But I want to show you that the highly interactive portion of the IDA graphic is probably the most critical area. You have good content, it's sequentially organized, you have lessons that are sequential, but the kids have to be interactive. And so here's what the research says. As the responses go up, so doth on-task behavior. As the responses go up, so doth learning. As the responses go up, disruptive behaviors go down. It is the most powerful part of management, is having well-organized lessons with many responses. And if you teach intervention, and I'm sure we have some people who teach tier 2 or tier 3 intervention, we know that this is one of the best ways to increase the intensity of the intervention is increase the opportunities to respond. Now, there are many types of responses that you could use. You could have them say it together, as we saw in that video. We could have them say it to partners with structured partners. First one say the answer, then two say the answer. Even giving them sentence stems so they have complete sentences with the critical vocabulary. You could call on individuals to check understanding, but really consider no hands raised policy. They could write on whiteboards, not just in math, in many classes. I just saw a lesson where the teacher was teaching a review, actually a lesson that reviewed the conventions in English in terms of punctuation. She put up a sentence, they read it, and on their board, they drew a question mark or a period or an exclamation mark and held it up to show it. So there's many times in literacy that we could use whiteboards. And if you watch the end of the video that we're going to send you, you'll see that the students also had holdups. Not just whiteboards, but they could hold up their fingers for an answer. They could have response cards that they held up. And actually, the research is particularly strong on two things: unison choral responses and holdups. But the big idea here is that all the students would be involved. So if I came to your room just like I did yesterday, this is what I was looking for in terms of opportunities to respond. At number one, there were many responses. Number two, that the responses were overt, not just having them think about it, because I cannot measure what they're thinking about. I cannot monitor it. So I'm going to have them think about it and say it or write it or do it. Overt responses. For every day in every class, every student is participating by speaking, writing, or doing. And I'm going to involve all students. Majority of my responses that I'm going to request for them is everybody responses. Having basically a rule of no opt-out. Everyone does everything. Why, this is borrowed from my very good friend, Kevin Feldman, who is a Californian. And he summarized his work with older students, middle school and high school, in terms of everyone does everything. Everybody thinks about it. Everybody writes it. Everybody shares it with their partner. And then sometimes a teacher will verify a few students, but the majority is everyone does everything. And the no hand raised policy, I hope that you're going to start that after, maybe after Thanksgiving or Christmas. And that active participation needs structure. We don't just say turn and talk. We say ones, share your answer. Now twos, tell them if you agree or disagree, so that we have equity of everyone participating. And I'm going to give you think time or time to write down your ideas, preparation time. Well, as often happens with Archer, she has too much to share, but I thought you might be interested in general idea about the number of responses we might like. So in these reviews of research, meta-analyses, they found that very effective teachers had 3 to 5 opportunities to respond per minute, not per period, not per day, but 3 to 5 per minute when they were very simple responses. But when they were more complex, those teachers still got many responses, at least one opportunity to respond per minute, where they shared with a partner, or they wrote down an answer, or they completed a math problem. So, Archerisms. Well, learning is not a spectator sport. I have to be doing something. I have to be underlining. I have to be writing. I have to be saying. I have to be, if I want it to become permanent memory. I need to rehearse and retrieve. Everyone does everything. Now I'm looking at my clock, and our time is going down, but I cannot stop without telling you that sequential instruction is systematic, very explicit instruction, tell, don't ask, opportunities to respond, everybody does everything, but very powerful is the feedback I'm going to give. So I'm going to give positive feedback throughout the lesson and corrective feedback when an error occurs. So just to remind us a little bit about feedback. So anytime I respond to a behavior or a performance in the classroom, I'm going to give feedback. And it is effective if it is immediate. So I turn and say, everybody has their books open to the right page. Thank you very much. I listened to those words and they were all accurate. So it could be a positive feedback, but it's immediate, or it even could be a corrective feedback. That word is would. Say it with me. Would. Spell the word. W-O-U-L-D. What word? Would. So it is corrective, but it's still immediate. And it's specific based on the behavior or the performance we have just observed. And it's genuine, particularly in terms of praise. It should be very genuine for students to receive it. So positive feedback, which is looking at the process. It's process-centered, not personality-centered. Process-centered is, you said every sound and you did not stop between the sounds as you blended out the word. Terrific. That's the process versus, oh, you're so smart. That is personality, less effective in terms of learning. And we could give general positive feedback, such as a nod, a smile, good job, wonderful. That helps create a positive environment. But what's really useful is behavior-specific feedback. Excellent. I heard all of those sounds within the word. Good job. You said the sounds and you wrote down the corresponding letters and spelled it correctly. Nice work. Where I tell you praise and the desired behavior. But feedback, immediate feedback, that is positive, useful. And we could correct errors. Now, this is the area that I'm currently studying. What kind of corrections in literacy pay off? Well, this is a correction routine that we're trying out, where we hear an error and I immediately tell you the correct response, and you repeat the correct response. And then I guide you through redoing the item again, the question, responding to the question again. Now, we used to always go to repeating the item and guiding them through it, but we found it useful to tell them the answer first and then guiding them through it. And really, corrections, it's matter of fact, they should be matter of fact in a very sincere tone of voice, very calmly done, and in a neutral manner. Because every error should be corrected if learning is going to occur, because feedback feeds forward. And so when I give you feedback, you know what to do the next time you have a similar item. Feedback feeds forward. It doesn't feed back, it feeds forward. Well, there were so many other things that I would love to tell you, but our time. Wow. So when you get this, be certain to look at the last slides that I have to give you, but I did give out of a personal request. Yes, some teachers in California emailed me and said, don't you have some way that we could read all of the archerisms? Now, we only focused on a few of them, like how well I teach equals how well they learn, or monitor by walk around, look around, talk around, or feedback feeds forward. But don't forget, our job is to teach with passion, manage with compassion. Do you know that archerism was given to me by a student in Salinas, California? One day, I just taught a lesson, and I went out to recess to check out what fourth graders now do at recess. And this boy came running across the field to me. And I said, hi, yes, you were in my class I just taught. And I said, what would you want to tell me? He said, well, if there was a teaching contest, you'd win it. And of course, you know, one of those statements you can carry for your entire life. And I said, well, can you explain it? And he said, well, you teach with passion and you manage with compassion. So I end that with a fourth grader's message, a California fourth grader's message that changed my heart and reminded us of exactly what we need to do. Now you're going to stay on for a few more minutes because I've got to turn this back. I gave you another sort of a little bonus if you wanted to learn more about explicit instruction. This is a mental map of explicit instruction. But I'm turning it back to Jessica.
Thank you, Dr. Archer, for that amazing presentation. We don't have time for questions today, but I did want to share with you the wonderful webinar series companion document that we have created to accompany each webinar. This companion document includes prompts to discuss after attending the webinar and some additional resources to further explore this great content. The webinar companion documents and the recordings can be found at scoe.net/CA dyslexia. Next slide, please. Just wanted to also give a shout out to CDI and its professional learning network that it's hosting in the spring. Please register for the link in the chat. And finally, if you wouldn't mind filling out a survey that we have shared the link for and we'll reshare in the chat as well. It's important for us to hear what you thought about the webinar, and it helps us tailor future webinars to meet your needs. Dr. Archer, I would love to thank you on behalf of Glean Education, the Sacramento County Office of Education, and the California Dyslexia Initiative. And thank you to our wonderful attendees who join us after school to listen to all this great conversation. We look forward to seeing you at the next webinar with Dr. Jose Viana on structured literacy and English learners on January 11th, 2023. Please register for that event. Link is in the chat. Thank you, Dr. Archer. It was truly fabulous.
It was a total delight. So teach with passion, manage with compassion, and be certain that everyone can read before they leave our school systems. Thanks for letting me come to California. Have a great day.
Thank you.